Here's a question worth sitting with for a second. If your side project started making you 5 times more money than your actual career, would you walk away from the career? Most people wouldn't even think twice. Pack up, move on, don't look back. Zach Johnson had every reason to do exactly that. A Minnesota corn farmer who accidentally built one of the biggest agriculture channels on YouTube, who turned a camera and a beat-up tractor into a brand worth more than his crops, who got sponsors calling him from companies he'd grown up buying equipment from. Zach had the exit ramp right in front of him, and he didn't take it. Instead, he made a series of decisions that nobody expected. He doubled down on the farm. He restructured his family's operation for the next generation. He bought into a business that has nothing to do with agriculture, and somewhere along the way, he went from being a Minnesota farmer with a YouTube channel to being one of the most recognized voices in American agriculture today. How that happened and why it matters is a story that starts long before Zach ever picked up a camera. The Johnson family has been farming the same ground in west-central Minnesota since the 1870s. Swedish immigrants made the crossing in 1868, landed in a part of the country that was still being settled, and staked out 160 acres near the town of Lowry. By 1876, it was an official homestead, and from that point forward, every generation of Johnsons has worked that land. Think about what that actually means. That farm survived the Dust Bowl. It survived the farm crisis of the 1980s, which wiped out a significant chunk of the family operations across the Midwest. It survived commodity crashes, equipment disasters, brutal Minnesota winters, and all the unpredictable forces that have driven hundreds of thousands of farm families off their land over the past century and a half. Every single time, the Johnsons found a way to keep going. Zach grew up knowing that weight. His father, Nate Johnson, farmed alongside his own father, and before that it went back the same way. By the time Zach was old enough to understand what he was inheriting, it was already clear that the farm wasn't just a way to make a living. It was a responsibility passed down through 6 generations of the same family, on the same ground, in the same part of Minnesota where his great-great-great-grandfather first broke soil. He took it seriously. He went to work alongside his dad, and eventually the two of them were running the full operation together, a corn and soybean farm covering around 2,600 acres. It wasn't glamorous. Row crop farming in the current commodity market is a constant grind of tight margins, input cost pressure, unpredictable weather, and equipment that seems to break down at the worst possible moment. Zach knew all of that going in, and he did it anyway because that's what the Johnsons do. And then in the spring of 2016, something shifted. He wasn't trying to build a brand. He wasn't following a content strategy or chasing a trend. What Zach noticed was a disconnect, a growing gap between the people who grow food and the people who eat it. Consumers were asking more questions about farming practices, about GMO seeds, about herbicides, about how livestock was raised, and the answers they were getting were often coming from people who had never set foot on a working farm. Zach figured he could do better than that. He posted his first YouTube video in April 2016. It was simple, spring planting on the family farm in Minnesota, done in a casual, unscripted style that showed exactly what happened on a given day. No production value to speak of, no plan for what came next. Just a farmer with a camera, talking to anyone who happened to be watching. For most of a year, not many people were. The early videos got modest numbers, the kind that make most people quietly close the laptop and admit the experiment didn't work. Zach kept posting anyway, because the goal wasn't views, it was to tell the story of what actually happens on a farm, in real time without a filter. He stuck with it through a season when most people would have given up. Then came fall 2017. Gearing up for harvest. Went up on the channel and hit 100,000 views in 3 or 4 days. For context, none of his previous videos had come close to that number, let alone in that time frame. Something had clicked. Viewers weren't just mildly curious about agriculture, they were genuinely hungry for it. Authentic, unpolished, real farm content from someone who clearly knew the difference between a planter and a combine and had no interest in dumbing it down for anyone. Word spread. The subscriber count started climbing in a way it hadn't before. And Becky Johnson, who had been running a daycare business and managing the family finances on the side, looked at what was happening and made a call. She shut down the daycare and came on full-time to edit the videos and run the business side of what this thing was clearly becoming. About 2 years later, the channel had another breakthrough moment of a different kind. A tractor got badly stuck in the mud during spring planting, and instead of stopping the camera, Zach left it running. What followed wasn't a meltdown or a frustrated rant. It was just a farmer methodically working through a problem while talking his audience through every step of it. No drama manufactured for the camera, just a real thing happening in real time on a real farm. The video crossed 1.6 million views and became his most watched upload, and it's still used as the shorthand example for what the Millennial Farmer channel is actually about. Unfiltered, honest, day-in-the-life content that makes you feel like you're standing right there in the field. The brand that followed is worth understanding because it's bigger than most people realize. By February 2023, Zach crossed 1 million subscribers on YouTube, a milestone that puts a channel in genuinely elite territory on a platform with hundreds of millions of creators. Lifetime views passed 350 million. National sponsors lined up, including names that don't typically chase social media creators. John Deere, AGCO, WD-40, his very first sponsor long before the channel was anything, and Farmers Business Network, which became his biggest partnership to date. A merchandise store launched and moved over 2,000 units in its first 6 days. Public speaking invitations started coming in from agricultural conferences and farm expos across the country. He also launched a podcast called Off the Husk with Becky and fellow ag creator Randy Nessman, better known to followers as the Master Pipe Layer, exploring the business side of food and farming with guests from across the agriculture industry. The podcast eventually went on hiatus, though Zach has mentioned recording new episodes. A second YouTube channel called Between the Rows launched as a space for everything that didn't fit the main channel. It's evolved mostly into a motorsports and racing channel, which fits given that dirt track racing is one of the things Zach does when he's not farming or making content. Somewhere in the middle of all this, he admitted publicly what many people had already suspected. As early as 2019, with the channel still under 500,000 subscribers, Zach confirmed to CNBC that the Millennial Farmer brand was already making him at least 5 times more money than his actual crops. 5 times. And by the time the subscriber count more than doubled from that point, there's no reason to think that gap got any smaller. That's the number that should frame everything that came next. Because when you're earning 5 times more from a camera than from the land you farm, the conventional wisdom says you start thinking about your exit strategy. You scale back the farming. You hire out more of the operation. You start treating the farm as a backdrop for content rather than the actual job. You drift toward the thing that pays better. Zach went the other direction entirely. The decision that truly surprised people wasn't buying the shooting park, though that's a good one. We'll get there. The more consequential move, and the one that most of his audience probably doesn't know about, was the farm succession plan. At some point, Zach and his father Nate sat down and started mapping out a formal transfer of the farming operation. Not a vague handshake agreement about what happens someday, a structured, documented plan with a 10-year timeline, focused on transferring machinery ownership to Zach and positioning him to run the full operation on his own. The goal was straightforward. Within a decade, Zach would own most of the equipment on the farm and be the person holding it all together. This matters more than it might sound. Farm succession is one of the biggest financial challenges in agriculture. The machinery alone on a 2,600-acre corn and soybean operation represents hundreds of thousands of dollars in assets, the kind of transfer that can go badly wrong without planning, and which ends with family farms being broken up or sold off to pay estate taxes or settle disputes. The fact that Zach and Nate went through the process of actually structuring it with a timeline and a financial framework says something about how seriously Zach takes what he's been handed. He's talked openly about the machinery side of it, the cash flow calculations, the ROI math on new equipment versus running older gear, the decisions about which technology is actually worth the investment and which is just overhead. He said he doesn't need a refrigerator in his tractor and has no interest in paying for one. He thinks about the operation the way a businessman thinks about a business, not the way someone with a romanticized view of farm life talks about it. And he made the calculated decision that the farm, the actual physical farm, was worth structuring his future around. That's not the move of someone who's one sponsorship deal away from walking away from agriculture. That's the move of someone who means it. Then came the shooting park. In December of 2022, Zach joined 3 partners to purchase the Alexandria Shooting Park in Minnesota. His co-owners were Steve Gould, a professional trick shooter known for performing with his brother across the country, Garrett Streitz, who owns both Alex Pro Firearms and a retail gun store called Lakes Area Arms, and Tyler Notch, the executive director of Grand Arbor. Together, the 4 of them took ownership of a property that included a shooting range, an RV park, and a banquet facility. For a YouTube-famous corn farmer, that's an unexpected acquisition, but it fits for anyone who's followed the channel closely enough. Zach has been open about firearms and the outdoors being a genuine part of his life, not just content. The partnership brought together people with deep expertise in shooting sports, firearms retail, and facility management. Zach wasn't walking into something he didn't understand. Still, nobody had that particular combination on their radar for what Zach Johnson's next move would be. The new ownership group laid out real plans: year-round indoor shooting, sporting clays in year 2 or 3, a potential retail component down the road. They were deliberate about learning the business as it already operated before overhauling anything. Whether that venture ends up as a significant part of the Johnson business portfolio or stays more of a passion project remains an open question. But what it illustrates is the same pattern that shows up everywhere when you look at Zach's decisions. He doesn't stay inside the lane people assign to him. Around the same time, Zach and Becky launched Harvest Outreach, a nonprofit built around a cause that hits harder in rural Minnesota than most outsiders probably realize. Grain bin accidents are fast, catastrophic, and often fatal. A worker gets pulled into a grain bin and the window to get them out alive can be measured in minutes. Rural first responders frequently lack the specialized equipment needed to make a rescue in that time frame. Harvest Outreach raises money specifically to address that, distributing grain bin rescue systems and training funds to first responder teams across west central Minnesota. The nonprofit also awards college scholarships through a partnership with Anderson Bash, targeting students pursuing degrees in agriculture and skilled trades, the workforce pipeline that keeps farming operations running. Applications are open to residents of west central Minnesota, and the fund is built on the premise that investing in young people entering agriculture is investing in the long-term health of the industry itself. It's worth noting why this specific cause. Grain bin accidents are not a headline issue. They don't get national coverage. They're the kind of thing that devastates a farming community and goes largely unnoticed everywhere else. Zach used his platform, an audience of over 1 million people, to point attention and resources at a problem that would otherwise remain invisible outside of the communities it affects most. He also connected with Farm Rescue, an organization that mobilizes volunteer crews to step in when a farming family is hit with an illness, injury, or crisis during a critical planting or harvest window. In 2022, he assisted his first farm rescue case in Raymond, Minnesota. He's gone back since, and he's used the channel to raise awareness for the organization on a scale their own resources couldn't reach. By the summer of 2025, Zach was standing at Minnesota's Farm Fest outside of Morgan, moderating a panel on how artificial intelligence is reshaping agriculture. A sixth-generation corn farmer debating the ethics and economics of farm automation with industry experts, in front of a crowd of farmers and ag professionals. The arc from those first stumbling 2016 videos to that stage is almost impossible to map in a straight line, and yet every step of it makes sense when you see it laid out. There's one more piece of this that doesn't get talked about enough, and it might be the most important one. Zach and Becky still live in the farmhouse where Zach grew up. Their kids are growing up on the same land that 6 generations of Johnsons have worked, going back to a Swedish family that crossed an ocean looking for ground worth planting. In a 2025 interview at FarmFest, Zach talked openly about the pressure and the pride of potentially raising a 7th generation of farmers on that land. His own words, "The farm comes with pride, and it comes with pressure, both at the same time." The succession plan with Nate isn't just a tax and equipment document, it's a statement about what Zach believes is worth committing to. At a moment in his life when the easy path was clearly laid out, scale back the farming, let someone else run more of the operation, focus on the content and the business empire, he chose instead to formalize his future with the land. To put a structure around the thing that's been in his family for 150 years and make sure it has a shot at going for another generation. That's the decision nobody saw coming. Not the shooting park, though, that surprised people. Not the nonprofit, though, that mattered. The real unexpected move was choosing to stay when everything about his situation would have made leaving understandable, even logical. Most people who build what Zach has built do it to get out of somewhere. He built it to go deeper into the same place his family has always been. There's a version of this story where a Minnesota farmer picks up a camera, gets lucky, and slowly drifts away from the thing that made him interesting in the first place. Where the YouTube money gradually replaces the farming, and the farm becomes a set piece rather than a livelihood. Where 6 generations of hard work becomes content. That version didn't happen, and at this point it's not going to. Zach Johnson is building something that looks more complicated and more durable than a YouTube channel, a media brand, a nonprofit, a business partnership, a farm succession in progress, and a family legacy he has no intention of being the one to break. He's doing all of it while still climbing into the cab every planting season, still working alongside his dad, still posting video from a farm that's been in his family since the 1870s. The decision no one saw coming turns out to be the oldest kind of decision there is: showing up, staying put, betting on the land. Whatever Zach does next, he'll do it from Lowry, Minnesota, on the same ground his family has called home for 6 generations. And that, more than anything else, is the part nobody predicted.